love to welcome a friend of mine, Elsie Gale. She's an independent midwife, a nurse, an advocate for cultural safe care. Elsie, welcome, and it's all over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Olga. It's really good to be here. Thank you very much for asking me to speak to your um, folks. And really, I hope we're going to have a conversation, to be honest, because largely what I have to talk about is my own experience of bringing up children in a different locality. Uh, so, just a little bit more about me. So I was born in Jamaica, mixed heritage, so white, black, and Indian as a result of slavery and indentured labor and the colonialism that, was wrought on Jamaica in particular and the Caribbean. Um, I followed in the footsteps of my mother when I was in my early 20s to come here to train as a nurse. I didn't run back home because I met my husband, who was also Jamaican, got married. And the rest is history, really, because have spent the rest of my life running behind him and his work. So we lived here for a while. We have three children. And then the time came that we went back to the Caribbean with our young children. They were still in, well, one wasn't at school and the others were primary school and then secondary school, just the secondary school. So they started their education here. They had their education partly in Jamaica. And then we left Jamaica and we went to Africa, to Botswana for a while. So they had more education in Botswana. And then we came back here. And everybody completed their education here. So we have somebody who is qualified in law, somebody who is qualified in social services, and somebody who is qualified in music and moving on now to become a psychologist, a clinical psychologist. And because I come from, and my husband comes from, a Jamaican family of warmth and togetherness, and we've had education in Jamaica. So we both of us were educated in Jamaica. To look at the situation when we had to sort of decide about education here, it was like, what do we do? So one of the first things I want to talk about then is the education system and how important that was to us. So in terms of education, certainly in this country, I wasn't very pleased to be educating my children here. And this is how the anthroposophy bit comes into it, Olga, as we were saying, because I had to find something very close to the sort of Christian, um, warm, measured, happy childhood like I had like we both had. What we had to lose actually was the rush for education, tip-top education, but we were able to do that ourselves. So in terms of the education, then I think that's one of the most important things for parents to think about wherever in the world that they're actually engaging with education in their with their children. So for us then, so family life was really quite important in terms of what was the culture that we were engaging with and managing to keep our own culture because for us, being a Jamaican, being a black person, being somebody who could mix well with others, whoever, wherever we are. So the Jamaican motto is out of many, one people, right? And we try to embed that wherever we were in the world, really. Not bowing to anybody, but maintaining sort of. My husband is a man that talks about you have to jaw. He's a good, very good negotiator. And I guess I take that from him as well, so that we can actually not lose the things that are important to us, but certainly uphold them, in terms of our culture, our language, the foods we eat, and stuff like that. But also appreciating the other things that we met. So, for example, when we were in Botswana, we met things like The same things that we were eating in Jamaica, like goat. So we eat goat in Jamaica and they eat goat in Botswana. So appreciating the things that we could appreciate wherever we were living and working. Living in community so that we lived amongst the people, we learned from them. And what was really astonishing was the language situation, because certainly in Botswana, the children were speaking other languages. So they spoke Setswana, which I mean, I was so shocked. But they were actually um, being a part of the community as well as sharing their own. Certainly in terms of language and patois, all my children understand it, right? They understand it, and they do speak it. And certainly in England, we don't really, I mean, I guess we don't have we don't live in the Jamaican community. So it's basically only when we are at home or indeed visiting Jamaica. So the things around our culture that were really important, things like dance, saying your prayers before you ate your food, always saying your grace, thanking God for the food that was provided on the table, being courteous to your parents, no drug taking, although I mean that is so difficult really in this day and age, sort of living values. I mean, I've never smoked weed. I think my husband smoked it once, and that was the end of him smoking weed. So it's really trying to bring up your children, certainly in the way that you possibly have been brought up. I guess there are some things you want to leave behind, but the things that you value as a family. So it's making sure that you hold to those things that you recognize as being really important so that you can, whatever it is children decide to do in life, that they are doing it well and they are confident in what they set out to do. Not all of us are going to be accountants or doctors, but there are professions that are very necessary. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, nurses and midwives are the creme de la creme, right? We can't do without them. But then that's my thing. So, language and customs, the things of your home country that are really important. I think, as far as I'm concerned, those are the things that we need to hold to. Our culture, dance, music. For me, drumming is so important. These are the things that really they speak to my soul, and I think there are things that each and every one of us will have. Um, yeah. Food's also important. When I first came here, God help us, I couldn't find rice. I was living on the South Coast and there was no rice to be bought, right? Except if we went to the Chinese restaurant to have dinner or something. There was no rice. We had to go to London to buy rice. Well, now there's rice everywhere. So we have encouraged others, maybe that, European people that go and visit our own countries, they like our foods, they experience it, and we also import our own foods as well. So quite often we will see a lot of people in the Jamaican restaurants who come from other cultures, but they come to buy the food, right? And for us, foods are really quite important. And when you're sick in hospital as well, these are the things that people crave. I remember I used to work at City Hospital on the Dudley Road Hospital as it was then. And there was massive complaints about the lack of food that people recognized, whether they were Asian, Jamaican, or wherever it is they came from. The food was not. It was English food, and people had to bring well, certainly when I was in hospital, my mother brought my food for me, and that really helped me, soup and all these sorts of things. So it's really about maintaining these cultural things that are critically important to make us feel good about ourselves, confident, and empowered, um, and holding ourselves without, no animosity. This is who I am. And these are the things, certainly for us, we've tried to instill in our children. And parents will differ. So my husband, for example, he's not an argumentative kind of a guy. I am, so the blend for us was really good. Single parents, I guess they have a little bit more of a challenge because they have to be mother and father. I don't know how they manage. I raise my hat to them because I don't know if it's something I could do. Please God, I would struggle with that. But these are the things that are important so that we can actually begin our children. And the first 1,001 days of a human being's life. And then the Bible tells us about the first 7 years of a child's life. These are the times that we need to instill the things that are important for our culture, for helping children to become their best, to live to their optimum. We need to nurture them with good thoughts, but also foods, education, all the things that are important that we perceive. These are the times that we need to really pay attention to, because once they become into their teen years and start, experiencing other children, things become very, very difficult. And I'm not saying we didn't have a challenge, because we've had a challenge every time, really. Each teenager was a challenge. But thank God we've overcome that now, because they've long past all of that. Um, so we're looking at thinking about things like sex, drugs, friends, peer pressure. These are the sorts of things that we have to kind of manage. And, I guess everybody will have their own ways of managing. Certainly in the Caribbean, kids were beaten. I got a good amount of licks, right? But you can't do that here in this country. And I guess I'm not sure about other countries, but certainly in this country, it would be perceived as assaulting a child, and you could actually be held up for doing that. So we've had to, well, not us really. Did I? Yeah, I think one of my children did get some licks, that's for sure. Not in this country. But we have to be very careful. And sometimes actually when we consider some of the things that we were brought up with, maybe we need to rethink. So for example, I know my daughter-in-law, who is herself Caribbean, she they discipline their children in a very different way. So they go and sit on the naughty step, or they get they get challenged and asked to think whether they've made a good choice or a bad choice and stuff like that. So I guess being in a different scenario from our own um, home countries helps us to perhaps find and adopt some better ways of supporting our children to do well. And I know that definitely I've had a friend who was a social worker actually, and the way she brought up her children made me kind of think a little bit more about mine, really. So, I was, children shall be seen and not heard. That was what was given to me. And she never did that. And I was thinking, maybe I need to think about something else. So I blended that. Um, yeah. So then managing diversity. Um, so we are empowered. We're living in a different space with our children. And one of the things I think I had to come to terms with is whether my children were going to have friends from my culture, friends who had the same thinking, the same abilities, the same behaviors, and so on. And who are they going to choose to be married to? You don't have a influence. Well, you shouldn't really have influence over that. Um, so I remember very clearly an uncle of mine being very, very upset because one of his sons chose to marry an English girl. He was so upset. But I'm saying to him, really, I said, Uncle, we live in this country. We have to kind of accept what's going on, for these children. They've made their choice. And if it is that we've brought them up, because they had both Jamaican parents, this child was both Jamaican parents, and they would have given them the values that they thought were important. So sometimes we have to bow to the choices that these children make, which are safe. Then I want to move on now to education, career planning, work. And there are some I know there are some some cultures where, I mean, for example, Nigeria, I understand, children are very prone to have their careers chosen for them. So there's the lawyers, the doctors, the accountants, and stuff like that. And that can actually happen here. I've seen that the education system allows for that to happen. It encourages competition, and it you excel. And sometimes, in order to get the best jobs, you have to excel more than the other person who is in the running. So I kind of get that. And as long as we can support our children, my fear was for my children was that they would break down. So in the fierce competition. So for example, there was a young, this is actually the Chinese are also the same in similar sort of boat. I met a little Chinese boy. He was 5 years old and he was doing cello, golf, guitar, music, like theory of music, chess. And I'm thinking he's 5 years old, for goodness sake. And the pressure to keep some of these kids, the pressure that they're under. What my fear was that children will break under those pressures. But also, when do they get a chance to enjoy their childhood? To do what we were doing in the Caribbean, to run on the sand, to climb trees. I mean, please, God forgive me for stoning dogs and whatever it is that we choose to do as children, making up in the holiday time, forming groups, cooking. We used to call it running boat. We're sort of cooking on outside from the things that we could gather from the kitchens, next door's kitchen and our kitchen. Enjoying life as a child, learning to climb, eating the fruit that we find in the woods and things like that. You know, some of these children, they're under pressure the whole time, but it is our choice at the end of the day. And as long as we realize, I think people like us who come from outside, we are experiencing a very different sort of pressure to the indigenous people, the indigenous European people who live in this country. Racism, discrimination, ill treatment, and so on. We have those pressures. So on top of the education and whatever other pressures we have coming out of our family, I think these are the things we need to think about and how do we balance them. Personally, I chose for our children a very gentle way of education. So the Steiner system, and I had to kind of look at that very carefully because Steiner he's Austrian and he was supposed to be racist. Having said that, I looked into that as well, and there are things that I had to sort of sidestep. Like they have Black Peter at Christmas time. Well, we had to stop all that in the school. But these children, they learned to make bread, made soup. This is in the kindergarten. They I had to fight the children to have a day off from school. They went to school every single day. The only day in their entire childhood they didn't go to school when we were in England was the day when the heating broke down in the winter and they had to come home from school. But even in the winter, when it was snowing, everybody would have their sledges and they would be in Mary Stevens Park and sledging down. And the teachers, they had a teacher. So they had a nursery, a kindergarten, and then they had the class one. So class one happened at the change of teeth, and they went with that teacher all the way up to when they started to do their GC type work. Um, yeah, very, very gentle way of education. There were no exams, no SATs or anything like that. And they learn to think for themselves. So that was our preferred way of education. Not everybody would want that. Some people would want something a little bit more tight. Um, the other fallback of that is that you had to pay for that education. So my wage as a midwife went to that. I mean, we had to just make that decision. really. It was either that or we're gonna have to go back to the Caribbean because I didn't want to utilize the mainstream at all. So in a way, sometimes we have choices and we need to think about those choices, not just blindly go into the education system. The other thing about the education system, which is, when I was researching it, is the fact that Bernard Cord, I don't know if you want to make a note of this guy. Bernard Cord is, I can't remember, I think he's a Grenadian, but he wrote a book about how the West Indian child was made subnormal in the education system. So a lot of young people came with their families. So children, school age, came with their families, and they were recognized as or named as SEN, educationally subnormal, and put into classes, and they weren't properly educated. They were being educated to do menial tasks. And what I do know is, certainly having been a part of the education system in my country, in Jamaica, we are the bee's knees. Absolutely. People work very hard, they value education, and they do very well. So I, in fact, had to use that piece of research when somebody attempted to not give one of my children, a space. We have to challenge, and we have to challenge in ways using evidence that we find. And there are groups out there who will help. So there are people like Professor Gus Augustine John, he's a long time educator. He must be in his 80s now, but he's still fighting the cause. There are people out there. So certainly in terms of education, there are people who will help communities or help groups of people who have an issue. The other thing is that there are some Christian groups that set up their own schools. So yes, the anthroposophy is one, but I know that the Seventh-day Adventists, they had a school in Birmingham. I'm not sure if it's still going, but one of the midwives I worked with, she was working there as well. So we need to kind of explore for our children what it is that we want, and then we should seek it. Sometimes we have to do it ourselves. So yeah. Then we have to think about health. Health is another area in which there are problems sometimes, and we have to be very careful to make sure that we understand what is being said to us around health. And always to know that we need to have um, an understanding of how the system works. So, for example, maternity care. What is the best practice? And there's a lot of information out there that people can seek when they're pregnant. And for me, anyway, it's a very critical time because there's the intergenerational trauma. We want to break that. We want to break it. So there's generational trauma coming down from the time of slavery. So those of us who are impacted by slavery will certainly have a measure of intergenerational trauma embedded. Okay, sometimes we don't recognize it. In fact, sometimes we don't even know about it. But we need to look after ourselves when we are pregnant because the baby, the fetus, is a part of us. And any anxiety, anger, like domestic violence, ill treatment from the staff, um, anxious because you're not sure what's happening, what is the plan for your pregnancy. You need to have a plan in place so that you can actually be a little bit more relaxed, understand your needs, what are you entitled to make sure that you get everything. So that's one of the things that actually our little group of midwives set up to do. We do some talks. We work with women who seek help. Women who have a good pregnancy, who birth well, are able to nurture their children. So the ways of, breastfeeding is perhaps the best way to develop the brain. Um, and managing those things, sometimes we have to make choices. So information, decision making, these things are quite important, and we need the information to help us to make those decisions. Nurturing children, Maybe we have to go back to work. What do we do with the little ones until it's time for school and stuff like that? Everybody has those sort of challenges to meet, really. Then there's immunization. That is a big issue for some people. Certainly, when I was working in Africa, that was a massive problem because some people did not want any immunization, but some people wanted all the immunization. The same thing is happening here. There's a big question mark around immunization. But for me, choice is very important. And again, you need the information so that you can make the decision. Do you have everything? Do you have some things? Where do you get the information from? Can you trust it? Are people giving you informed consent? They can't just say, right, I'm just going to be giving you this injection now. Okay, bam. That don't work. You need to be actually consented. What are the pros? What are the cons? So, childhood immunization is a standard feature of healthcare here and is something that people need to take very seriously and think about. Certainly if you're traveling, I mean, certainly when we went to Jamaica, it wasn't an issue, but certainly when we were traveling to Africa, we had to consider what immunizations we needed because we were going to live there for a while. And those are the things that we need to think about. I know certainly in the States, there's some mandatory immunizations you have to have if you're going to enjoy the education in the state system. Making sure that you take up all the screening tests that are offered. Um, that's also quite important. And again, informed choice is important. Then we come to mental health. We also come to the police and trusting the people who are supposed to be looking after us, caring for us, shielding us and protecting us. That is a very big issue, certainly for Black people in this country, and I guess in other countries. And certainly I know that the US is having a problem now with all these deportations and the arrests and things that are going on in the US with the change in the direction of the government. So we need to really, I would say, think about these things very clearly before we do. So I went to New York in April gone. This is just an example. And on I like to have all the information at my fingertips. So my computer is got all sorts of things on it in terms of evidence, and I'm voracious when it comes to healthcare. I want to know everything about healthcare. What's the good? What's the bad? I want to know about COVID, and so I had to, on the instructions for the group that we were working with, I had to leave my computer behind because I swear to you, I would have been arrested for nothing because I'm just interested in the information. I'm not lobbying for this or that, except for informed consent. So, we just have to be very careful how we put ourselves out there. Social media is another thing that comes to mind with this. How do we engage our children with social media and the media itself? It's I don't know, it is just quite a trial when you have young people and the use of the media. Everybody is, well, most people, I would say, are involved now with using social media. Certainly, engaging the news is really important to be able to see and hear what's going on. So, where do you listen to your news? What news do you hear? Is it one sided? How do you balance that? And how do you ensure that your children are safe in terms of what they are watching and what they're engaging with? That is very, very difficult, I would say, in this day and age, really. So then now we come down to the police. And the police scare me. I was brought up to respect the police. My parents had peers who were police officers, and we were brought up to respect the police, to engage them when we needed help. But then what we see sometimes is that the police are not always very kind or helpful to us. So what do we do about that? So I do my best really not to engage with the police unless I have to. And it has to be, I have to have the evidence. So I'm always asking if I have to say, for example, report. What did I have to report? I had to report something. Oh, it was one of my children. They were attacked or attacked going to school because they used to walk to school. And so I had to report, but then I made sure to get a crime number. These are the things we have to understand the systems. If we don't understand the systems will possibly turn against us or malign us. So we have to understand them and always try to get some evidence in order to back up what it is we're doing. So I got a crime number for that particular incident because I wanted to make sure that they were paying attention. Not that they were too bothered about it, I have to say. Safeguarding is another issue that I know impacts, certainly in this country, it impacts Black children more than it impacts white children. It also impacts other vulnerable kids like Roma kids and so on. But our children have some of the worst outcomes when it comes to safeguarding measures and the social services. And again, they're supposed to be doing a job to help and support and protect us, but we cannot always depend on that. So we have to be on our guard. I'm not saying distrust them, but certainly have a very healthy, critical approach to how we interact with them. Um, Sometimes the services, people cannot speak, like for example, if you look in the press now, what you will see is a lot of NHS workers, social services, they cannot speak out about stuff that's going on for them. And rather than stand up for the client, they will turn against the client and not be helpful to the client, put it that way. And certainly as a midwife, supporting women who've made different choices. So, for example, women who choose to birth by themselves. It's lawful for women to do that here, and some women choose it because they don't like the system, and they choose it. So, social services, we have to be very careful to make sure that their needs and their values are plainly out there and that the social services understand and get what it is that's going on for them. Otherwise, they'll be reported to social services, children will be taken away, they'll be on the books, and so on and so forth. So, it's not always that we get the best help. I'm not saying that people don't need help from social services if they're in difficulty. They do. And that's what the service is there to do for us. Um, I think that's everything on my list that I can think about. Oh, money management. That was the other thing. The last thing was money management. We need to make sure that our children are able to manage their money. And people do it in very different ways, really. One of my children is a spendthrift. The other one, she's a budgeter. So I don't know how we went wrong with the spendthrift, but maybe because my husband's a budget and I'm a spendthrift. I don't know what went on there, but those things are very important, particularly now in these austere times. It's really about managing your money, making sure that they access good food, healthy food, and stuff like that, rather than going to the chicken shop or the McDonald's or whatever, and be able to look to the future, pensions. Where are they going to live? Are they going to pay somebody else's mortgage, or are they going to, or they're going to have their own house to live in and stuff like that? So, yeah. So that's basically all that I can think of in terms of raising the issues that I was asked to talk about. I've tried to do it
Mm.
from my own experience, and I'm happy to have a conversation with anybody about any of the things and more because, it's a vast subject bringing up children in any country, to be honest with you. So, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Elsie. And I'm gonna start with money management. You finish with that, and I myself know about money management when it comes to my kids as well. Because as you rightfully say, my son has got married, and his wife is really good at managing money. So she has been teaching him how to. My daughter, as soon as she gets her pay, it's all finished. So you touch about immunization and also the police. It is important that we educate our children, especially in the global majority community, about the risk and the issues that we face as a global majority with the police, and also encourage them to join the police because it will only get better. So, quite a few things you have spoken about. As about schooling, the reason why you move from different areas. So interesting. You talk about social media as well, which is one of the biggest things right now. I am gonna throw it out there. The floor is open. We've got a few people on, and if you'd like to drop questions in the chat box, if not, just raise your hand, and Elsie is more than willing and able to go through just about anything you want to throw at her. Spoke about your inspiration to become a nurse and a midwife. So can you take us back a little bit about the beginning of that? Because that was quite interesting when you started talking about moving from, your mom was a nurse here, and then you decided to become a nurse. And you have traveled, you've lived in quite a few places. You have lived in Africa, back into England. Yes, what inspired you more than ever?
Well, the truth of the matter is this, right? I really wanted to be a musician or a journalist. That was my
Yeah.
thing. And so I'm heavily involved in our culture, Jamaican culture, heavily, heavily. It's just awesome. And but at the time I was struggling with my parents and I just needed to get away from home.
Yes.
Also, I didn't have a career pathway apart from going to the University of the West Indies and doing journalism. But then it
Wow.
meant I have to live at home, and you know what I mean? Anyway, the long and short of it is, I saw it as a way to see another part of the world.
Mhm.
London, I wasn't really all that bothered about nurse training, I have to confess. But it
Mhm.
was something to do. I had somewhere to live. I was being paid while I was doing the job. And yeah, so I thought, right, that's what I'll do. I'll go to England. I'll go to my mother's old nursing school on the South Coast, and
Wow.
I'll become a nurse. But actually, I really honestly didn't like nursing all that much. But the great thing is about that is that I had the opportunity to take a module in midwifery my
Okay.
second year, and that
Mhm.
that was it. Honestly, I just had to hurry up and finish my nurse training, pass first time, and straight into midwifery, and that has
Wow.
been my thing ever since. Really.
Thank you so much. In the NHS, you have worked in Africa and the Caribbean. And how have these experiences shaped the way you approach maternity care? Because our members who are listening here might not realize that you are a unique midwife. So if you could just go into that, because I know that you're involved with the United Nations, you're an independent midwife, and you're one of the few. So how was all this experience in the NHS, being independent, Africa, the Caribbean? How was it shape your approach to this maternity care? And we know it's big out there at the moment because there's a lot of issues going on with especially global majority mothers.
So what I will say is that I mean, I think I've looked after women from all over the world, in most countries in the world. In England here, but also in Botswana, because in Botswana, the situation was that the Botswana were being sent out of their country to educate themselves to come back. So the exporting of their indigenous people meant that they had to fill the gap. So that's kind of how I ended up doing nursing and midwifery, in fact, midwifery and nursing in Botswana, right? Um, and the experience of not speaking the language. Not everybody spoke English. Not speaking the language, I had to kind of learn how to. I didn't always have an interpreter with me who spoke both from, one of the healthcare assistants. So it was actually learning to listen to people very carefully. So I learned to listen. I learned to understand people's lives and how they lived. I admired, I admired some of the things, and I saw some, what shall I say, some similarities in Jamaican people and the people who are Botswana. So, for example, I'd stand up in the clinic and I'd look out the window and there'd people sitting outside under the tree chatting. It was so therapeutic for, they were, I don't know what they were talking about, but, it was a gathering of people in a social space. And so I bring that back now to my work with women. So we gather in a social space to have discussion around whatever it is in terms of maternity services and so on. But I think I learned a lot about humanity, the niceness of people, the kindness of people, the meanness and maliciousness of people as well, right? And actually, how do you manage that when you're in a foreign land?
Yeah.
How do you? And I'm not my husband's a good negotiator. I am not. I've had to learn that skill, really. I've had to learn that, and how to speak with different people at different
Yeah.
times about different things. So I think I've kind of grown up, really,
Yes.
and matured in terms of that. And
Yeah.
also allowing the children to experience.
Mm,
So, for example, all my children are readers. They read voraciously, and
mm,
making sure that they join the library in every country that we were in. They would join the library and
mm,
um, uh, have discussions, and I don't know, be social people, and holding themselves up. So one of the things I definitely know is that my daughter, she was 3 when we left here. So she wasn't at school when we first left.
mhm.
So, and we went to Jamaica. Then when we went to Africa, and then we came back here. So on the TV here, I still see it now. When they're advertising for support,
Mm.
for healthcare or whatever, water and things like that, they put on a black kid with
Yes.
flies and the eyes and all of that. The first time my daughter saw that when we came back, she said, "Mom, I've never seen a child like, I've never seen children like that when we were in Africa. Like, what is that
Exactly.
about? You know what I mean?" So then I had to kind of go through what I thought was going on there. But it's given, certainly I've tried my best to make
Mhm,
sure that they've got something good out of everything that we've done or been places we've been. So when we lived in Botswana, we I made sure we traveled to Zimbabwe, we engaged Zimbabwe on some of the stuff. We went to old Zimbabwe. Do you know what I mean? We kind of have to use all the interventions that we can to
mhm.
engage our children, to be people of the world rather than some black kid who was engaged in the police. I don't live like that. And I wouldn't, encourage women not to sink down, to empower themselves. And we don't have to live a flashy life. We don't have to be on social media. We can very humble. I mean, my parents were very humble people. They never spoke about the stuff they did and stuff like that. So that's the family I come out of. Nowadays, yeah, I guess my siblings who are in Jamaica, they don't do that either, despite
Mm.
the social media situation. So,
Yeah. We've got one question from Tana.
okay.
Speaking about immunization, she she said she's a new mother here. Is there a connection with immunization on autism? What I hear scares me. No offense intended. We know you have no offense intended, Tana. So I'll hand over to Elsie to discuss that.
Yeah. So, Tana, thank you very much for that question. And it is a question I continue to have with parents that we have worked with years ago. What do they do? It is very difficult. Certainly the autism and the MMR situation, that's in the news big time. And this is why I say you really, I'm glad I don't have to make those decisions anymore. I have to tell you. It is very difficult because once you put the needle in and the juice in, it can't come out. So you're making the decision based on what you think or what you've been assured is evidence. And it is your decision to make. People who talk about so professionals who talk about immunization as being something bad get hammered, they get reported, they get struck off. So you won't find a lot of people saying, do not have this immunization, right? You won't, it will be difficult for you to find somebody who, the best thing I can say to you is look at the evidence. And that is the reason why, for me, that's why my computer is the way it is. I want to hear from this quarter. I want to hear from that quarter. I'm looking at everything. It's like buying a freezer, right? I want to look at the whole thing before I buy the freezer. So all I can say to you is this, yes, I understand. I would probably have the same fears myself if I was to make that decision now. But the best thing I can say to you is do your research. I mean, if you want to talk to me afterwards and I can signpost you to different things to look at so you can, make your decision based on that. But I couldn't advise you. I can't advise anybody. I'm not into the business of advice because you have to make the decision. And it is a hard decision to make, particularly if you're scared, really. I had to make some decisions like that myself. So I get it. I get it.
Okay, I've just a question, please.
Okay, Tony, go ahead.
Yes. Thanks very much, Elsie. One of the reasons why we brought up this topic is because of the challenges that, as you're aware, there are a lot of movements from, families from Africa, especially to UK in recent years. And from your experience, you are likely to be aware that a lot of parents have run into trouble, with the government because of the way they handle either the upbringing or the training or trying
Yeah.
to, imposing certain rules, the way it's done from where they are coming from. From your vast experience here and there, can you just speak on one or two issues and advise them generally?
Okay, so let me say beating, slapping. We cannot hit our children now in this day and age. We in this country we can't do that. We have to find alternative means of disciplining them. It's very difficult, and sometimes I've known women to release their children. There's one young woman who I supported. She had to release her daughter because she was of age and she engaged social services against her mother. And this is why I say the beginnings of childhood is so important. You train up the child in the way they should go and then they don't depart from it. You hope, right? Because it don't work like that all the time. So I think you cannot hit your children because you'll be going into a safeguarding social services situation then. You have to find another way. And the communities can come together, Tony, to discuss these things. How are we going to work with our children? Do we engage them in after school activities? Sometimes children are so bored because there's nothing to do and they hang out in the park with their friends and then they get into trouble. We need to engage our kids with activities that keep them on the straight and narrow. Um, Engage in the police. So young people now they go out and they may be accosted by the police. I think so. That is something that really scared me. I had to prepare my children. So to make sure that they have, so if they're going, say for example, they're going to town on the bus, going to Birmingham on the bus, and they're going to the movies or whatever it is they're going to have lunch or dinner or something like that. But you have to make sure that when they're out there, they are understanding the dangers. They're in a group together, um, and that they know how to handle themselves when they are accosted or not accosted, but if the police have to speak to them, they have to know how to handle themselves with the police. And I know definitely there's a group of people that have put together a card to say, if you are questioned by the police, these are the tips. I can't remember what it's called now. It's like, like a stop and search situation. This is how you handle that. For me personally, I made sure to tell my children, if the police stop you, open the phone. Phone me and keep the phone open because I want to hear what's going on. You have to find ways and means to help. And sometimes if the community comes together, Tony, like after church sometimes, you can gather, have a discussion and decide how you move forward with some of the issues that you're going to meet. Really, if somebody, say for example, is having a mental health problem in the group of friends, if they've been accosted, any sort of angst that's going to call attention to themselves for the authorities to engage with them, you have to have a strategy of how to manage it, and it's better to prevent it than to try and sort it out after the event. Really.
One more thing before you go, Elsie, please. One of the issues that these young children have is peer pressure.
Yes.
Can you say something about it because of time?
Peer pressure. Well, I think we've all had it. We even have it now, right? As older people, we still have it. What can I say about it, Tony? We have to,
I'm sorry, please. I'm talking about the parents now. How can the parents help them?
yeah, and this is what, yes, I get it, but that is so difficult because they want to fit in with the group, don't they? And the peer pressure moves them to do that or tries to get them to do things that are not correct, not right. I don't even know how you do it. I don't even, it's really a matter of engaging the child,
Hmm.
showing them the dangers, getting them to work, helping
Mhm.
keep the conversation open with the child so
Yeah.
that you actually get some of what's going on. Keep tabs on them, who are their friends. Invite the friends to come to the house so you can actually meet them and
Mhm.
you can suss them out for yourself and then support the child with that relationship. You really have to. I mean, we are wise people as parents. We've lived a life, we've experienced a lot of these things, and we've learned how to manage some of these things. So, some of the peer pressure situations we will have seen, but that's a very difficult one to manage, I have to say. And that's why a lot of kids get into trouble and they can't come out. There's a barrister that just passed, rest his soul, a guy called Courtney Griffiths. He was a Jamaican Casey. Well, yes, the most amazing barrister I have ever heard speak. He spent his entire career defending black boys at the Old Bailey. Murder, you know.
Mhm.
And you have to wonder what is going on in our community. How do we help the young people in our community? But I think we have to engage them, help them. And I guess that's why some parents stretch them by giving, piling on all the work and the challenges to help them to move on rather than to get sucked into hanging out in the park with friends and stuff like that.
Thank you so much,
Okay,
Elsie.
one more, Joe. Okay, I'm so sorry, just one more. At a particular age, these children, they start behaving in a way that, like you said earlier, is not correct. Again, how can this might be similar to my previous question, but I think I've spoken with a lot of parents that are really, really worried about the attitude of their children at a particular age. It looks strange to them. What advice do you have for them?
So what sort of age you talking about, Tony?
Maybe 14, maybe 12, 14, 15,
Okay. So that's
when
the
they're
age when
approaching.
yeah,
Hmm.
but that's when you're coming into yourself, isn't it? But don't forget, forgive me, Lord, but we are living in a racist society.
Mhm.
Racism is embedded in this society. And aside from racism, there are other systems of oppression that exist. So there's the oppression of women in this society, well, in all societies, I would say, so it's very difficult. And my husband talks about some of the young people that he meets in his work as a maths teacher, you know,
Mhm.
encouraging them is very difficult, They end up in these Prue schools, Prue, yeah, because they can't fit in. It's like they cannot see the oppression that comes because they are not the same color or of the same thinking as their peers. It's a problem for people, as Olga would say, for people of the global majority,
Mm.
because the systems of oppression are embedded in this society. And honestly, we have to understand it, and we then have to help our children to work with it, to jump over some of the things that they encounter. That's how I see it anyway, and
Yeah,
I've had to journey it myself, to be honest with you. I don't
right.
know if I was super successful, but you know, and the
Yeah.
prison system, God help them if they get into the prison system.
Just looking back over your career, what has been the most rewarding moment for you as a midwife?
The babies that come into the world.
I like that.
Yeah, no, the miracle. Just think about it now. Just close your eyes and think about this.
Yeah.
There is a woman and her partner. It may be her husband or it may be her mother or her sister. And there are two midwives, because that's how I work with another midwife,
Hmm.
right? And this woman she's on a journey and it is hard and it is arduous and she don't know if she's gonna make it, and we're at it and supporting, and it's really to the height of heights when the baby is just about to come out, and then the baby comes out. And then there were four people in the room, and now there are five people in the room.
Wow.
How amazing is that?
Amazing.
No. So that for me is like the business, right? I love it. I love it. And
Yeah,
praise God, we
yeah,
managed to do that for women,
yeah,
support them to do their thing. It's not
yeah.
about us, it's about them and their thing.
Yeah. Elsie, what a privilege and an honor to actually host you this evening on our the Come Let Us community project where we engage with our global majority community. And I want to extend our heartfelt thanks for joining us this evening. I mean, your session was insightful, it was empowering and deeply relevant especially during these times, raising children in global spaces. And you've helped us explore the realities of raising our children, as I said, in that global experience. You've given experience about you and your husband, the journeys you have done from England to Jamaica, from Jamaica to Africa, and it was inspiring. You touched on identity, you touched on culture, you touched on media, you touched on immunization, but especially you touched on the police, which is a big thing in the global community, and the unique challenges that faced by Black and global majority families. So the way you spoke about guiding children through media, understanding social influence, and protecting their well-being. And I must add in it also money management, you know, gave our audience both knowledge and confidence. And so I want to thank you. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your experience. And thank you for your encouragement. And really, your voice was really made a difference tonight. So thank you on behalf of Reverend Tony, who is our coordinator, and my co-chair, Dr. Abiola, who unfortunately is not here tonight. But thank you also on behalf of our members and our audience who was so listening and so in that mood, in that mode to listen. So thank you so much. So